Welcome to Turek Books Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm your host, Joshua Turek. We're never going to read all the books we want, but when someone tells us about a book, that's its own valid form of experiencing it. Our guests come in to talk about the books that left lasting marks on them as readers, and that becomes a springboard to who they are, who I am, and maybe who all of us are. So sit back, relax, and enjoy it. And who knows, maybe you'll end up grabbing a book or two. Maybe you've read some of them and it's nice to hear someone else talk about them. We want this to be like a book club, but without the guilt. Portland, Oregon, it's Joshua Turek. I'm going to be in your city on August 24th doing stand-up comedy with the legend Simon Gibson at the Mississippi Studios Theater. Come on out. Tickets are available on MississippiStudios.com. Well, thank you for tuning into another episode of Turek Books Podcast. I'm so excited for our guest today. He has his own podcast now. It's brand new, called Finding My Audience. He's done a half hour for Comedy Central. Alan Strickland Williams.
Hi, everybody. Hello, Joshua. Good to be here. Thanks for having me. Thanks for plugging my podcast. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great. I've been listening to it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. We're figuring it out. We're throwing everything at the wall right now.
You're finding audience, and I'm one of them.
Oh, thank you. And people have done that naturally, too, which is like, people be like, you found me, and I'm like, oh, I didn't even think about that. That's great.
You're making us feel like the treasure, so it's very seductive. It's
good. That's what I'm going for.
I've been found. Yes, he found me. I'm the treasure.
Perfect.
Well, yeah, you're my friend. I've always admired you. I love your comedy. And
thank you.
Yeah,
mutual.
You're a book reader.
I am a book reader. Yeah, I mean, I would say right now my relationship to reading is pretty tortured, as is pretty much everything right now, but yeah, like I grew up, was always a huge reader, and I come in and out of it, of course. I wish I could say I've been a nonstop reader my entire adult life, but it really has come and gone, depending a lot on usually how much stuff I'm trying to do.
Yeah, I like hearing you say that. When it becomes the thing, then suddenly it's just the thing, and you go to it. It's like the little heat source in your life. Yeah, this is where I'm going to find comfort and inspiration and excitement in my books. But yeah, that it comes and goes. It's hot and cold.
Well, and also for me too, I think it really is a byproduct of I'm not anti-therapy. I just haven't been going for a while. But one thing that happened the last time I was in it deep was my guy was like, hey, you should start like putting stuff on your own calendar about the things you want to do, like read a book, go see a movie, work on your screenplay, whatever, that stuff. And I was so against it because I'm like, no, I don't want to put more stuff. I don't want to literally put more stuff on my plate. I want to look at my calendar and see big chunks of like open time. But like everything, the older I get, the more I'm like, oh, they were right about everything. Because it was kind of like a thing, I was like, oh, now I can put it on my to-do list, or I've just been like a crazy person using a bunch of Post-it notes all around my house. But I'm like, oh, I can now write this down as a thing that I need to get done and get into. But anyway,
thank you
for that.
Reading is a thing, and you forget it because it doesn't feel like it. And structure is important, especially in the life of an artist like yourself. And also this sense that like you resist structure because you're like, the French don't. French don't do this.
Right,
this isn't like the romantic way to live your life, putting Post-it notes around your house. But then it actually brings you to the romantic things.
And and to speak of the French, it's like, yes, it seems like they don't, but I think they actually do, because then it's like they threaten to raise the retirement age to like 62, and they organize and make a date and meet up and set everything on fire. So, I think there's some logistical planning going on.
Yeah, they know how to plan. You're right. Maybe because they're such an old culture, they have that structure baked into their life. They call it culture, which we don't. We have a mission. We don't have a steady one here.
Right.
Our culture is work and productivity.
100%.
And destruction.
If there's anything that I always feel, it's like when someone asks you how you're doing and you say, "Oh, I'm so busy." And you're clearly saying it with the subtext of I have too much on my plate. I hate this. I need a vacation, etc. But what they say is, well, busy's good. Like in a desperate, frightened, like little, busy's good. And there is some truth to that. And, you know, I always think, you said not to knock on the table. I literally just knocked on the table. But, you know, they're you do see, like, you know, just driving here, you see people that, you know, are unhoused and everything like that. It's like, okay, it is good to be busy. I get that. But it's like, it's well,
busy is a brush off too.
It is.
So when someone tells you they're busy, you can also read the brush off and be like, thank God, because I have a fear of intimacy too, and we don't have to extend this anywhere deeper.
Oh yeah, well you really know how well you're doing by how many seconds of the pause there is after someone asks you, how are you doing? I'm good.
You just keep walking. You just drift away.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sure,
How am I doing? Drift away. Yeah. Well, yeah. So what kind of moment you said, knowing you were coming on the podcast sparked a flame in the reading again. What are you reading these days? How's your reading life?
What I'm reading right now is a book called Journey to Distraction, Recognizing Coping with Attention Deficit Disorder from Childhood Through Adulthood. I'm not saying I have ADD, but I am saying that multiple times recently I have caught myself in cycles where I'm at my laptop working on a joke. I see something out of the corner of my eye, like literally like a mote of dust. And then I get up and I start cleaning it. And then I like see the dishes and I'm like, oh, I need to go do those dishes. And then I do a little of the dishes, and then I see the mote of dust again, and then I go back to that. I'm like, wait, I need to finish that joke before I forget what the joke is. And I've talked to a bunch of friends that I've heard this recommended a lot, and it's like it seems to be from a pretty medical perspective. I was prepping, thinking about reading, thinking about books. I was in the shower this morning, and I was like, oh, I don't want to pick this book because it's like a self-help book. And I don't even know if it really is a self-help book. It maybe not, but I was like, wait a second, why am I anti self-help? Like I get the concept itself should be good.
Yes.
Right? It should be good to help yourself.
I think a skeptical part of ourselves wonders if we're being had.
Yes, 100%.
By the rainmaker who comes into town and says, you're going to make it rain, just give me some money and your time and a place to stay.
And oftentimes too, it does seem like they're bullshit. Like, you know, sometimes it's so you know, but this is what I've been reading, and it's been hard. It's been hard to focus on it, and it's been hard to make the time for it. But that's
it's kind of rude to write a book about ADD and then expect people with ADD to dial in and read it, you know?
And I guess that's the thing too, is that like I you know, I don't want to lay claim to anything. I haven't been diagnosed or anything like that. But, and I guess that is a thing about self-help too. Whenever you read something where they go, where like the end result is supposed to be like, oh, they're talking about me. I'm like, it's so funny. In fiction, I like getting that backhandedly. I like being like, I can relate to this. I can sympathize with this, et cetera, et cetera. I don't like doing an assignment in a book and then being told what I am and being like, oh, now I have to act this way or look out for these things.
Yes.
But
fair. And what in your personality resists that? Because I'm the same way. And once the self-help book goes to the workbook section, I always skip it.
Yeah, it's pretty hard. I mean, I think it just goes back to a very like juvenile, like, do you remember in school when like things start to happen where it's like, oh, you're in second grade, you got all the words right on the spelling test, so now we're going to give you more words. I always felt like that was unfair. Like I didn't understand that. To me, it didn't make any sense. And the older I get, the more I come like, okay, yes, I get it. But to me, that just immediately the equation is you're quote unquote good or proficient at this. We're going to punish you with more of it. And so I think there's a little bit of residual holdover from that.
Yes, the pile on.
Yeah.
Well, and like you said at the beginning, busyness. Like, you know, here, like if you don't yourself have ADD or ADHD, you live in a culture that does have it, that's like constantly pushing you to do more in different directions and spreading you thin is how it feels.
And that's one thing too that I recognize. I'm like, you know, neurodivergence or whatever the correct term is. Beside the point, I'm like, I know that I'm literally doing more than I've ever done in my life, and I'm doing most of it alone and against the backdrop of the world. So it is sort of like, okay, I need to just learn ways to focus in. If I can get any sort of clarity on this stuff, I'll take it.
Yeah.
So that's sort of like, yeah.
I love it. The search for clarity, and that's what books bring us to if they're good and if they resonate. Yeah, you have your pile of books here, and that's the one you're currently reading. Is there one in there that's like personally impactful? Do you want to start with that?
Let's see. I guess it would be, I guess if we want to say personally, I brought 2 books written by people I know.
Cool.
So I guess let's do that.
Yeah.
And I can't, and actually, yes, one of them really does get into things I would say are personal to me. But this is Ars Botanica. This is by a friend of mine named Tim Toronto, who I went to college with. Very, very. I knew him as a. I think he was a fine arts major. I knew him as a painter, as an artist, a visual artist, I should say. Then this guy goes to the Iowa Writers Workshop and is like a great writer. This book has, as you can see, there's a lot of illustrations in it too. Let's see, written as letters to his unborn child, Tim Toronto's Ars Botanica describes the infinite pleasures of falling in love, the small discoveries of each other's otherness, the crush of desire, the frightening closeness, and the terrifying impossibility of losing someone. So it's very like, it's about grief, and I think that's what kind of, during the time I read this, there was a lot of grief swirling around me. And I think it did really help in those moments to sort of like see the way someone else dealt with it. I guess I guess that's sort of the thing of like, not that you're always thinking of how to use everything, but that is just kind of the byproduct of, I feel like, what a lot of us are doing if we're pursuing a sort of creative, endeavor of some sort. I do feel like you're kind of not using everything, but everything moves through you in a way.
You're finding ideas that are applicable to your expressions.
Yes. And ways to get them out there in ways that aren't totally maudlin. Not that isn't inherently wrong, or that can't be a good thing too. But it was just very powerful to read. Sorry, there's a subtitle, Ars Botanica, A Field Guide to Loss. And so like, that also appealed to me too, because like a field guide, nowadays you just have your phone with an app on it that tells you what everything is. But field guides used to be, and I used to be a science kid, science major, until I screwed all that up. But field guides were like literally text that you would take out into the field, and it would be like flora and fauna of the southwestern United States of America. And so you take it out into the world, into a national park, et cetera, and then you'd have all these images, and it would say like, oh, well, does this leaf have 4 trees stemming off the stem, or does it have 5? And are they waxy coated or are they not? And so by using these little sort of, I think that's actually an algorithm too, like a very rudimentary one, but like these yes and no questions, these binaries, you then say like, oh, this is the Western African daffodil, or like whatever, So that appealed to me too. It kind of was combining all these different things that either in my past or at the present time when I read it really, really spoke to me. And also it's just kind of funny too. Like, I like to support friends. I like to support fellow writers and artists and things like that. And it was just sort of impressive that this guy that I've known to always be so talented was even more talented in another area that I didn't know he really gave that much time to, or was even pursuing, to be perfectly honest. But
that's so cool.
Yeah.
So someone arranging a book in a format
mm-hmm.
through that time in college
mm-hmm.
is pretty special. It kind of like galvanizes a certain moment in your life, and then you could take it out into a different moment of life where you are now.
Yeah, and I don't know if it was necessarily. I think this was pretty heavy post like post our collegiate experience.
Right.
But
you knew him in college, and you were studying science in college. You were going through field guides.
Yes.
And so that, like, you were in that furnace. And then all these years later, he writes this book, and it somehow applies to that time and you and now.
And I even have a lot of feeling of loss with that pursuit. I was a pre-med. I was a bio major. That's why I went to Cornell where I went, and it's like a good program or whatever. And I did very well early on, so I was able to work in these labs, and then I was just like, oh wow, this sucks. I hate working in this lab. And I did that for maybe over a year and a half, I forget how long. And it did feel like the end of a relationship when I realized I was like, I'm not going to be a scientist because I can't work in the lab. I can't get up this early every day. And it is interesting. I wonder if now, how things would be. But, I obviously don't miss it too much. I'm not over here crying because I'm not pipetting in the lab anymore. But I am still very fascinated by that. And I guess there was that element too that was like, oh wow, the idea of going out into the world and sketching a trilobite fossil. I'm like, oh, that sounds so pleasant. I remember I went to I like going out to the desert. I like Joshua Tree. It's not just for drugs. And there's the park is fantastic and huge. And my day gig, and I feel like when we're writers, did you ever see that Nora Ephron Everything Is Copy movie? It's really great. It's it's about Nora, and she's had these different hats that she's worn throughout her career, but she said I think maybe her mom used to say everything is copy, and I'm just like, that is such a good sort of mantra. And there is whoever is writing the copy on the little display signs at the Joshua Tree Park. And this is something that I'm like, is the United States National Wildlife Department trying to hire a copywriter? I'm sure it's just someone there, but they're talking. There's this one dammed off kind of area. I think it's called I can't remember what the name of that area is, but it's basically right when you get into the park. And because there's a little dammed off area of water, there's a lot of wildlife. All the wildlife kind of congregates there. And it says something about maybe a desert mouse or something, but it said that this is a quiet spot in a noisy world. And I think about that all the time. And I don't even know where I was going with that, or how I started going.
The literature
there.
Is everywhere.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
You said everything is copy.
Yeah.
No, I mean those things are so fascinating in any of the parks. And you were saying, you were kind of implying that would be your dream job.
Yes, absolutely. Just to sort of look and oh, this is nice, and then sort of write about it, and then I guess maybe to jump a little bit from that, we don't have to go into it yet, but one of the books I bought is Kurt Vonnegut, and Vonnegut always said something like that. It's one thing that's really good to do is when it's a nice day and you're drinking a glass of lemonade and you just say oh wow, isn't this nice, or isn't this pleasant? It's make sure you don't forget to actually say that out loud, because someone else might need to hear you say that so that they know it's nice and pleasant. And I think about that all the time too, where it's you do kind of a lot of how you look at the world and a lot of your experiences, not to say 100% of them, but they can be helped with a little bit of this is great, we're all doing fine.
That reminds me of on 4th of July, I was with my friend and his wife 10 years ago, and we're leaving a beach in Malibu, and his friend, they're Brazilian, and their friend from Brazil was there, and she just kind of looked up and she goes, everywhere I go in the world is beautiful. And just her making that statement, I remember to this day, and every time I go somewhere, I'm like, yep, this place is beautiful too.
Yeah.
Minus Salinas, California. I'm kidding. There's beauty.
There are beautiful
there
parts of Salinas.
Yeah.
But it's interesting too how the time, the place, something that someone can say that you would maybe in a different mood or a different phase of your life or something, you'd immediately brush it off. I think of Frankie Quinones, who's a great comedian, great friend. He would earnestly say, "One love," like that, and I was like, you know what? Yeah, one love. The way he said it, I'm like, wait, yeah, well, I love. And then it's funny too. I always just joke about like people that love live music, and then I'm like, I do love live music. It feels good. I just like that's one thing I've been trying to do more is go to concerts and
You know what? Live, laugh,
live,
love.
laugh,
while
laugh.
we're
Yeah,
at it.
hey, why not?
What is wrong with that? To let our guard down to like the most obvious. And yet, yeah, when someone says it with conviction, it may take a while for it to sink in with some of the more skeptical ones, but it's true.
And the problem with the live, laugh, love, I think a lot of times is the font.
The font.
Yeah. We got to get past the font.
We got to work on it.
But, that is all cynical, skeptical stuff.
But the park services would never use that font either. I mean, it's true. I've been stunned by those park things too, and I sometimes wonder if it's unintentionally just earnest, and do they know it's loaded with so much beauty, or they probably do when they write those things in front of the volcano crater or wherever it is.
And I would imagine too, it's probably either people internal, just as kind of knowing a little bit how the sausage is made on this stuff at this point. I would imagine it's either someone internal that it's like a true passion project for them, or it's an agency that is doing pro bono work for like a tax write-off.
Oh, interesting.
Like that. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Well,
I don't care where it comes from. It hit me where it should have. So
and the fact that you still remember the line and it hit me, it gave me a breath when you said that. I was like, oh yeah, that's the combination of words I'd like hearing. And you saying that about Vonnegut, we can move into that book. But I actually wonder, because oftentimes my wife and I will go on road trips, or we'll go to these beautiful places, or go to the beach a lot, and I will hear myself saying, that's so pretty. That's so pretty. And part of me gets nervous that I'm labeling things with words, and then it's swallowing some of the prettiness. Their power.
But
I think hearing you say that, it's like, no, we're acknowledging it using language, which is how we all think.
I think it's,
or how we all not think, but how we communicate with each other.
I think verbalizing stuff is so important. And I know because I said that. No, but I live alone. I talk to myself constantly. That's a big reason why I started the podcast too. Is I was like, some of this is gold. Let's get this down. But I do think that the older I get, I take a very light. You constantly have to trick yourself into enjoying your life and like feeling like it's going well and stuff. But I do feel like a part of that is to hear your own voice say out loud, like, wow, that's beautiful, or whatever, because by saying it also indicates that you have the time to look, synthesize, reflect, and export something. Say something. Express yourself. So I think that then you're realizing, oh wow, this is so lovely, this is so pleasant. Most of the time I think that, when you have your blinders on and you're just trying to get through the day, that's when it's hard to see beauty in the world, and you only kind of see the loud noises or hear the loud noises.
True.
And
to verbalize it. I'm thinking of this volcano crater on the big island of Hawaii, and how I just went there by myself early in the morning in the rain, and I asked the woman at the gate her favorite trail. I started walking, and to my left, I'm just on this little jungle trail, and to my left is this massive black volcano crater, and out of my mouth involuntarily came the word wow. And it's like, okay, so on an involuntary level we are expressing with our voices, and so it would only make sense, like you're saying, and like Kurt Vonnegut said, to say, oh, isn't this lemonade nice?
Yeah, I think that was something that his uncle said or something. But so like so Slapstick, this is considered not one of his good ones, I guess, but if I'm not mistaken, I don't know if it was the first one I read, but I remember this one I remember reading it and loving it because, as you can see, if you want to take a look, it's like the divided into incredibly short sections, and so it was like so easy to just sit down and read. Like even the chapters have these little dividers within them. That feeling of constantly like, okay, I got that. I was always like, how much left is in this chapter? How many pages do I have left in the book? I've always been like that.
I do the same thing.
So that kind of kept it moving, and the idea. So
it gives you confidence because you're completing sections. You're completing them.
But I do, and so the other thing too is that I'm like, oh, this is very indicative of Vonnegut. It says it says hi ho over and over and over again throughout the book. That's like, he kind of repeats stuff. But welcome to the future and the 100th birthday party of Wilbur Daffodil II Swain, king of Manhattan, landlord and tenant of the vacant Empire State Building, genius idiot, pediatrician, twin, and former tallest president of the United States. See the world through his eyes, a world of mischief, piracy, lunacy, incest, plague, stunts, sadness, nervous laughter, and so on. And so the whole thing with this book is, it's like the way that they reorganize society is everyone's given like a kind of arbitrary middle name. And then if you have that same middle name, you're in a family. And so that's your family now. So that, like, it's just, I like the Kurt Vonnegut stuff that's very like a hook and then like blowing it out of proportion and seeing where we go. Again, like this book specifically, I don't think people would really like, I don't think people are like throwing this thing in Vonnegut's best, but I remember reading it in like junior high or whatever. I read all that stuff and absolutely loving it. So yeah, I don't know. I just think I think Vonnegut is pretty much like he's one of the few people where I'm like, oh, it would be very interesting to hear what he would be saying about things today, but then also he's left such a record that you kind of know what he would say. And even that's a little comforting in and of itself. Yeah. And
the fact that this book sort of reimagines the world and you were reading it at a pretty young age seems like a great way to sort of spawn an adolescent imagination or something.
Yeah, I always liked that stuff. I mean, I feel like growing up, it's like for some reason all we were reading was books like, did you read Hatchet growing up?
No, what's Hatchet?
Hatchet is by Gary Paulson, I think, and it's like we're getting some nods over here. It's like it's like a boy is in like the Alaskan or Canadian wilderness or something, and the plane crashes and the pilot's out and he goes out into the woods and he has a hatchet and like that's it. And then it's like, what I do remember, and now I'm like kind of bagging on that book, but actually I'm like, there's so much I remember because we did like 3 million book reports on it growing up or whatever. But there's one part where he talks about thinking that he's getting fired at, but he's not getting fired at. What's happening is it's so cold that the sap in the maple trees is, or maybe it's thawing or something's happening inside the maple tree where the sap inside is making the maple trees explode, sounding like he's under gunfire. But anyway, we were reading just stuff like that. So then reading something like this, which is more of like, not a harrowing one person like ordeal through like that, or like what's the Iron Wild thing or like whatever that stuff too.
Yeah, Call of the Wild. There's a whole.
That's like a whole genre that like I was like, why are we reading all this? We live in suburban Florida, like, like what's going on? But very very much like. Whatever that had, like, I think about this too with like, you kind of don't see a lot of movies like this anymore, but in the 70s and 80s, like where the premise is so like twisted and high concept, but that I'm like, but I like stuff like that. It does remind me of like and even like his character that he created, which is like sort of a version of himself if he was just a failed sci-fi writer, Kilgore Trout. Like those are like the real like one sentence log line, grab your attention, and like maybe completely unfeasible as an actual narrative, but interesting at the very least. And then, just I think I will say that, I do think that his sense of humor probably like really came through me a lot. And just sort of like, I remember like just him, I think it's Slaughterhouse-Five or maybe it's Breakfast of Champions, whichever. It's Slaughterhouse-Five, I think, where it's like just this, like the most devastating thing you'd ever read about death and loss of thousands of men in war, and then just so it goes. Like that is just like, that's fun. It's harrowing, but it's funny, and like you see what he's doing there. But yeah, and again, it's like I can't really sit here and be like, hey, you should read Slapstick, but maybe you should.
Well, the truth is I've never read Vonnegut. Like when I was a younger man, I took a peek into his books and they didn't like immediately grab me. Something about his voice didn't land with me. So I think if I'm going to enter Vonnegut, the picture you painted and through reading the sort of back description and how it connected with you, it makes me want to read this book. And I like the idea of worlds where chaos reigns supreme and they're trying to find order. And they're like kind of expressions of what we all suspect the world is, and then what lives in our brain made manifest. The carnival-esque atmosphere of like what's really inside of us and what this carnival we're navigating every day could really be.
It's funny, just as you're saying that, two things that are inherently Vonnegut jumped out at me on this one page. As you're talking about the carnival of absurdity, the line I saw was, "So we cultivated idiocy. We refused to speak coherently in public. Buh and duh, we said. We drooled and rolled our eyes. We farted and laughed. We ate library paste. Hi-ho." And then one thing that Vonnegut does a ton, which is so effective and so simple, and he spent time, I don't know if he was ever like an ad guy per se, but he worked in public relations at GE back in the day when like all those towns in upstate New York were like not husks of themselves, and like, you know, World War II, post World War II. But he does this very easy thing. He does it a lot where he'll say listen or look, and in this one it's consider. We were at the center of the lives of those who cared for us. I just think it's such a simple thing. Consider, listen, look. It's like
verbs,
yeah, and command verbs,
inward commands. Yeah.
And it's like, oh wow, I am considering. Oh wow, I am listening. Okay, cool. I need to be told every once in a while, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and just action calls to action, you know, kind of inspire us a little bit. They get us going.
Absolutely.
They're like you said, commands.
Yeah.
Like the dog part of our brain is just like, go, consider.
Do you remember when you were like in high school and like, well, so where I grew up, and maybe it was kind of similar for you, I don't know, but I feel like the mall really was like such a hang out like hub, and you'd go to the mall and maybe you'd see a movie, but then you just stand there in the parking lot after for like ever, and no one knew what to do or whatever. And I remember complaining about that one time, and my dad was just like, just tell everyone what to do. And I was like, what? And he was like, just say you want to go to Steak and Shake or something like that. And I was like, oh, I tried it the next time, and everyone was like, yeah, let's do it. And I was like, oh wow, this is crazy. Okay, great. Speaking of books, he was a real what is that? What's the How to Win Friends and Influence People?
Oh, was he?
Yeah, I only read half of it, so I have a bunch of friends. I can't make them do shit.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, sorry about that. So the next book I brought is by Sam Tallent. It's called Running the Light. Sam Tallent is a really, really funny comedian. He's out of Denver. He's huge now. He like did a bunch of stuff for he toured with Tim Dillon or something. But he was like the hardest working guy I've ever met. He's super funny. My parents met him once, still ask about him. He's one of those guys, gregarious. He's a bulwark of a man, huge guy. And he wrote straight up one of the best novels I've ever read. And one of the, I will say actually the best representation of stand-up comedy I've seen or experienced in anything, maybe besides like Steve Martin's Born Standing Up. Here's the bag. Debauched, divorced, and courting death, Billy Ray Schaefer is a comedian who has forgotten how to laugh. Over the course of 7 spun-out days across the American Southwest, he travels from hell gig to hell gig in search for a reason to keep living in this bleak and violent glimpse into the psyche of a thoroughly ruined man. Ex-inmate, ex-husband, ex-father, comedian is the only title Schaefer has left. Trapped in the wreckage of his wasted career, Billy Ray knows the answer to the question, what happens when the opportunity doesn't come, or worse, it comes and goes? And like, I think the beginning is like something crazy. It made me laugh because I think I was in the airport that it's like Billy Ray Schaefer stepped off the plane in Amarillo, Texas with $2,600 tucked down the leg of his black ostrich skin cowboy boot. Then we're off. And it's just, it's a tome. I mean, it's like, you know, part of it is I was like, damn, Sam, like, how'd you do this? And I think he said he would just write like in downtime, in between gigs, and would take time to do it too. As you can tell, it's sort of like falling out. And this is the best compliment I can give to a book. I read it in the desert and I couldn't stop, and I couldn't stop so much that the sun melted the binding, what is that, wax or glue or whatever it is. Excuse me. So parts of it are actually like kind of falling out, but
that's amazing. The physicality, the natural elements.
Yes.
All couldn't even endure your draw to this book.
It is just it's the opposite of Slapstick, where it's like like I think the shortest chapter is still pretty long, but it just has this real rollicking for if you've ever put together 3 shows somewhere and had to make them all, and you've ever driven yourself around town trying to make mics, whatever, I think that it will connect. And it's kind of funny because Sam, like, he started to pop off like recently. I mean, he really is. Sam's the type of person that, like, I think, like, oh man, I'm on tour, I'm doing great, I'm at a show, and then, like, I'll just find out, like, oh, Sam's in town as well, and he's like doing 2 nights or like whatever, and I'm like, God damn, Sam. Like I've seen him, like, at shows, like there'd be a drum set on stage, he just starts drumming. I'm like, you can drum too, like one of those guys. But super, super nice, super gregarious, just really impressive. And so, like I said, if anyone's watching this that at all is interested in comedy, put down the podcast for 2 seconds. Not this one, but put down the comedy podcast for 2 seconds and read that. I think you'll like it.
Yeah, it makes me think that, like, you reading the back page, some of that, it was like, okay, so he's like an average comic. Mm-hmm. It's like,
yeah, no,
and the way he's a comic who forgot to laugh. And the idea that a touring comedian, sometimes to me, it seems like they're a magician without tricks.
Yeah.
And all they have are their punchlines, which are kind of the big reveals. But you are kind of a scam artist in a certain sense. And in the best sense too, and people are coming to see you attempt to scam laughter out of them or something, and to take it to this extreme degree that this character seems really fun.
It's funny you say that, just because I remember in conversation with Sam one time talking about what comedy is, and I think we landed on it's a parlor trick. So that is very much like, it's in the schematics of what you're saying. It's like, yeah, it's pulling a fast one. It's like, hey, don't look at that, let's think about this, whatever, misdirection. But
yeah, and we're all better for it. Yeah, we're all better for it.
I think about that so often, to the point, I remember one time when I was a kid, I kind of grew up in the church. I accidentally walked into a room I shouldn't have, and I saw, it sounds like it's going to be way worse than it is. It's not that bad. I just saw a large group of people praying together, and it was weird. It was weird to see all these people head down in the direction, and then this one person who was like the powerful person or the preacher or whatever. And then I go and do comedy, and I'm like, well, that's what that is. It's like, I deserve the microphone for some reason, and you guys are just sitting there, you poor rubes. No, but
it's a ceremony.
It's
and
very
there's a speaker, a shaman, and you hope that what you have to say is worthy of the listeners or the.
But it is funny because I don't think comedy would be as popular as it is, especially right now, if people had that blatant thought of, I'm not funny, I need people to make me laugh,
right?
As opposed to, oh, we're just going to go have a good time at a comedy show.
Well, there's a trade-off to it.
But I'm also cynical and looking at it from the
you got to look at it from every angle. And like another one would be, your average person in the crowd at a comedy show sees a post on Facebook, or maybe even a flyer at their favorite coffee shop, and they go, oh yeah, I'm doing nothing tonight. Yeah, let me go. Whereas the comedian is like, this is my entire life. I've dedicated every thought, feeling, and relationship to this moment that's about to happen. And they're bringing every part of themselves to it, whereas most people in the crowd are like, yeah, I might laugh.
Oh, and I'm always like, I'm loving, like, what are the room dynamics? What are we talking? How can you touch the ceiling from the stage? Does it all form into a convex point or whatever?
The psychology of it.
Yeah.
The optics and the feel. What's the temperature of the room?
And great to come back, because those visceral things are in this book. Like those sort of, like, from that type of person, the POV of someone who's seen it all, had height, lost it, back, whatever you want to say.
It's like that nuanced in that to the detail.
Yeah. Very real.
Before I started doing comedy, I was so depressed I started going to comedy shows, and they helped me. So however that cake gets made, it does happen.
Absolutely.
And it's inspiring, and it's spiritual, but it's fun to kind of pick it apart too.
100%.
Wow, that book sounds amazing.
It's great. It really is. And it's you know, I want to shout out people I know and stuff. Like I'm sure they've done another pressing at this point, because he kind of got like, he did like I think maybe Stanhope and maybe Mark Maron and maybe some other stuff, maybe even Joe Rogan, through the book, through the book. So and then kind of became like more like, recognized for the stand-up as well. But I mean, he's one of the funniest guys.
And high praise to put that next to Steve Martin's book, Born Standing Up.
It really is. I mean, I just feel like stand-up, I will say I think Hacks did a really good, I think Hacks as part of like visual stuff is the closest things looked really good, but for the most part, and I'll say that even like a stand-up special, it's just not the same as seeing it live. No. You're already kind of removing it. So then if you're trying to like I don't know if you ever saw that movie, I think it's called Punchline. It's like Tom Hanks, Sally Field. It's like 80s, whatever. The comedy things are insane. And then like at the comedy club, like the comedians have lockers and stuff. And it's just like everything about it's so like goofy. Not a bad movie either somehow, but that's just the power of Tom and Sally, I guess. But yeah, I would recommend this over something like that, I guess.
Cool. This is such a random detail, but if you are ever in LA and want to go to like a little reading room, the Writers Guild on 3rd and Fairfax, they have a little library and reading room for anyone to go into, and they do have a locker room for the writers.
Really?
Yeah.
I love that.
I know. It's That's so great. Like the opposite. You're not going to go break a sweat and need to change your clothes working on your script.
No, it's like where you keep your typewriter ribbon and stuff, like stuff you don't even use anymore.
Yeah, that's right.
Like those old sheets of paper they used to do printers on where you had to like tear off the sides and stuff.
Three cans of cold brew. And
so I brought Call Me By Your Name by Andre. I don't know how to say his name. Aciman? I don't know. The reason why I brought it, I don't remember much about it, but I remember reading that. Someone may have given it to me. I don't know. But I saw the movie and then I read the book, which I never like to do. Mm-hmm. I always like to read a book before I see a movie. I don't know why, really. Maybe it's just better to imagine it yourself, or maybe I prefer to. But all that to be said, so nothing was very that wild about reading this because I already kind of knew what happened. Most things hewed very closely to what I saw in the movie from what I remember. But I had such a literally the last sentence or the last part of this book floored me so much that I literally went, wow, and threw the book. And this was like I was sleeping in bed and I literally was like, wow. I was like insane through the book and then like turned off the light and went to bed, or tried to. But I kind of wanted to look and see if I felt that way again, because I didn't look at it again. But let me just see. Yes. Okay. Yes. I remember now why it made me do that. So anyway,
we got to hear it now.
Well, it's just the best reveal of like, it's like just a tidy wrap up
of the whole book,
of
or
the whole,
of a
so that's
bigger
the thing.
theme.
Of just the product itself. Like, I guess people can skip it if you don't want the spoiler of what this last. How about that? Is that okay? Can we do that?
Yeah.
All right. So
you don't have to read the whole thing, but just an interpretation of it.
It's short. It's short enough. I stopped for a second. If you remember everything I wanted to say, and if you are really like me, then before you leave tomorrow, or when you're just ready to shut the door of the taxi and have already said goodbye to everyone else, and there's not a thing left to say in this life, then just this once turn to me, even in jest or as an afterthought, which would have meant everything to me when we were together, and as you did back then, look me in the face, hold my gaze, and call me by your name. I just went, wow. It's like they did it. But anyway, I thought that was so like powerful.
Wow.
Like, and maybe it's not, but it really did. When I was reading, I was like, wow, what a clean like ending to such a like when you're young and you're just sort of like in love with someone and you don't know what is going on inside of you or whatever. I mean, it's just like very viscerally like tapped that. And I would say better than the book. Or I'm sorry, better than the movie in that regard. And I liked the movie too.
And you started with the movie, so that's high praise. You were coming in with all this visual information.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, to sort of cohere that idea of I'm not going to get everything I want, so what is the consolation here?
Mm-hmm.
And to have this strange inversion, to call me by your name, it's like, to wow someone at the end with that too.
Well,
pretty
it's just,
impactful.
There's like an old sketch about like, I think it might have been an old UCB sketch or something, but like the guy who had like the name of the movie in the movie where he's like, oh, I'm sick and tired of all these Star Wars. Or like, oh no, I've got vertigo, or like whatever,
Right.
And I just think there is something kind of funny about that, because it's like, I'm very interested in, like, that's kind of when I was saying like the product itself, like what goes into a good title, like what goes into a good, like, and then do you mention the title in the movie, or I'm sorry, in the book, or do you save it, or do you kind of like hint at it, and do you go like, oh, I see why it's called that because of that. I think it was just like sort of the bluntness of it and just like ending on what it was. I just really appreciated it.
Yeah, I've never heard of a book that ends on its title.
Exactly. That's kind of it too. I was like, wow, that's sneaky and like really like, and I think, obviously like that's part of, one of the middle parts of the movie, and the book as well, is, them testing out this little game of Call Me by Your Name, but closing on that, I don't know. Yeah,
so it calls back something else that happens.
Yeah.
Because I've never seen the movie or read the book. But you talking about what what makes a good title, in our conversation earlier, we're beginning with call, which is the verb.
Yes,
the command.
Yeah.
Call me by your. Everyone loves you.
I mean, that goes back
everyone
to
loves your name, their own name.
That's part of how to win friends and influence people. It's
Dale
like,
Carnegie.
Always
vibes.
use people's name. Yeah.
So it's doing a lot psychologically on us.
Lots coming together.
Yeah, kind of interesting just looking at your pile. Running the Light by Sam Tallent. We're running.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's true. And Slapstick is very comedy-based, too.
Yeah, you kind of... And what a great word, slapstick.
And then I brought... this is The Case of the Velvet Claws by Earl Stanley Gardner. This is the first Perry Mason novel. So there was, like, the show recently. But Perry Mason was, like, on forever. And he's just, like... super lawyer, can get people out of things, based on this real guy from LA who was like a phenomenal murder defense attorney, and I think his last case was something crazy, like the real guy, where he had to, like, he was being threatened, they were going to throw him in an insane asylum, he had to like defend himself and prove he wasn't crazy or something, like just some nuts like thing. The reason why I brought it was because this was the last round of times when I got really back into reading. It was because of noir. And I started reading tons of noir, and I really like, there's a lot in New York, there's a lot in San Francisco, but there's a lot of LA noir, Dashiell Hammett, things like that I read that was like, I was like, oh, this is like, for some reason right now, reading it is so fun, and it's like, it doesn't feel at all like a chore, and it's like, I'm reading without checking my progress. I'm just reading for the joy of it.
The Case of the Velvet Claws.
And so the things that is fun about these books, and the reason why I brought it is because this has the best second sentence of anything I've ever read. Autumn sun beat against the window. Perry Mason sat at the big desk. Just so simple. Perry Mason sat at the big desk. It's like, okay, he's sitting at a big desk. He's gonna get some work done, whatever. But it's written so plainly, and there's such a sense of what happened. And I started to read into a lot of these authors, and a lot of them were like, oh, the reason why you're like that is because that's what I was like writing it. I didn't know how the things are going to be twisted or what the red herrings were going to be.
To write to surprise yourself and
yes.
to not know who the killer is of your own story.
Yes, 100%. I think that sounds fun. Like that to me, it's like, one thing about writing that is so... and you definitely notice it, like, say, when you're doing a screenplay. I can imagine it's only more so even with the novel. just so many moving parts and keeping track of those things. It's like, well, that's hard and that's a lot of work. And that's not to say that like you shouldn't do that, and you need to do that on some level, but the idea of it being a little bit more freeing as to like, where are these characters going to run? Where are they going to take us? How will they or won't they work together? That seems like, from a writer's point of view, like that seems fun. That seems exhilarating. That seems exciting. And then it also is a sort of like pat on the back to the writer themselves. Like, oh, look at this crazy character I made. Look at how they're just running off the page from me, you know?
Well, and yeah, they run and you follow them.
Yeah.
As the writer. And that's like exhilarating, because now your imagination's going places you didn't even know it could go.
Absolutely. And then it's funny too, though, because I'm like, I love reading Perry Mason specifically because it's like they're taking Angel's Flight downtown, and like they're over the 6th Street Bridge, like they're stopping by Kohl's for a French dip sandwich. It's like, wow, okay, that's that type of stuff, especially in this city where there's so much transition and so much, you know, falls by the wayside without even like an announcement or anything. It is kind of
cool to see things that still exist. Yeah. And I wonder if they exist because these authors and writers and movies were like mentioning them, so suddenly they took on a specialness, or were they just always special so they got mentioned?
I think there's a bit of that. I'm positive also any place that still exists, that existed during Perry Mason time, must have one hell of a lease or own the property.
That's right.
Or
That's
something,
right.
something like that.
That's right.
Just
one
because
stubborn
we
third or fourth generation member of the family who's like, no,
not
this is what we
to
do.
A developer.
I'm not selling.
Exactly.
This is what I know. Well, and Kohl's is between Kohl's and Philippe's, both in downtown LA or the vicinity, they both claim to have invented the French dip sandwich.
Right. I would love it if, we can talk about that. I mean, and I don't know where the real landing on it is, but my thing, I'm a Philippe's guy just because there's parking and the price point is so much. I mean, it's just like Kohl's is great. Kohl's is great. Unfortunately, the bar is closing. The Varnish is closing there, which is a real shame. That was always a cool night.
Philippe's does feel working class.
I would just say it's like you're talking about spending $20 on a sandwich versus spending like $8 on a sandwich. So it's just sort of like in this day and age, and then also parking's always easy. But then Philippe's also, it's like if you're going before a Dodgers game or whatever, it's like butts to nuts. But I've been going to the opera here and there downtown, and it's so funny because I went with my friend and we went to Philippe's first, and I was like, I bet there's a big contingent of people that do this. And sure enough, it's like all decked out in opera, ball gown, whatever stuff, but then eating a French dip sandwich. I'm like, that's hell. I love that. There's
the contrast of LA right there. That's beautiful. And yeah, you brought up Angel's Flight, which was like a little tram that brought you up this hill called Bunker Hill, which was like very much a working class neighborhood, a mishmash of so many different kinds of people. I'm reading Mike Davis right now. Have you read City of Quartz?
Oh, no. City of Quartz is one that's been on my list forever. Yeah.
So I'm now reading Dead Cities, and he's talking about sort of the death of Bunker Hill and the political arrangements of downtown. And, man, he is so densely... I gotta read that. If you love L.A., I mean, he pierces down, and it's noir in a sense that he pierces down to the core of the machinations of who's really running it, which is mostly developers downtown, and then it migrated to the west side. But yeah, in Dead Cities, he's talking about Bunker Hill and just the concerted effort it took to get rid of what was actually kind of a thriving lower class community that serviced the rest of downtown.
Well, and now it's literally where the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion is,
right.
And it's like where all the bank,
and he taught at an architectural school downtown, and so he very much was there. And the way he shits on like Frank Gehry as an architect and stuff, it's very satisfying. who, if you don't know, made that very famous Disney concert hall. Is that where you saw the opera?
No, that I've seen. That's typically where the symphony performs, or I'm sorry, the LA Philharmonic.
Got it.
And then every once in a while there'll be a concert in there, but the I think it's just called the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. I think it might be called the Music Hall at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion or Music Center. but it's gorgeous. I mean, and the inside, that Disney thing is kind of an abomination from the outside, but from the inside, it's gorgeous. And most importantly, it's like anywhere you're sitting, it just sounds amazing. It's pretty crazy. But yeah, it is. And I don't know, sometimes when I'm driving down the 101 where it hits the 110 and somehow it's not just littered with cars I always think that's so funny. I'm like, how is this not just every car crashing into each other? But then like you see like the Bonaventure hotel and all these buildings. I'm like, it's pretty.
I think it's pretty too. I actually remember being like 18 or 19 and seeing that Disney building and thinking it was cool.
Yeah. It's sleek. It's like,
but so this book brought you into a place you knew and these sort of enduring landmarks.
Totally.
And that's always a really satisfying feeling.
Totally. Yeah. It's, I mean, I think that's one thing that it's kind of like, it's happening less and less, I think, just because filming is taking place elsewhere more and more. But it is still, I'm just like, I saw that on the TV.
Well, that's what Mike Davis said, too, is because what we know of modern day LA wasn't really one thing or another. It almost happened inverted, where they would build things for filming, and that would then become the aesthetic of parts of the city. Right. And so it was like a city born out of cinema, which is really kind of
it's crazy to think back in the day, too, of like the lots were gigantic, and then also they would just have all this land where like they're like, we're shooting Cleopatra over here, we're shooting the African Queen over here, like, and they would just create these whole worlds. It is just completely unsustainable. But pretty wild.
Then they realized they could make more money putting shopping malls there.
And
towers.
Yeah, and then just shoot the film in Atlanta.
On a green screen. Well, Alan Strickland Williams, I've so appreciated our time together.
Thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun listening to you and hearing about all your books. And once again, Finding My Audience, your new podcast. Everyone should be listening to it.
Yes, and my debut album will come out soon. Everything's locked. We're just waiting on some design elements. But Finding My Audience. Follow me on Twitter or X or whatever it's called.
He's a very funny man, very smart, and I really loved having you here.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Turek Books. Be sure to like, subscribe, thumbs up, any kind of thing that could help us get listened to or watched by more people. We really appreciated having you and hope to see you again next week with a new guest and plenty of books. Take care until then.